Good afternoon. It's Thursday afternoon, and we're hanging out with Larry Johnson. That's Larry Johnson from the great website, sonar21.com. He's got some great articles, a whole lot of insight that we need to talk about, particularly things that are going on today in Moscow. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here with Larry Johnson. And just in case you didn't know, I always let people, know what's happening. A lot of us in the podcast world, we try to keep up with current events, and there's certain websites, there's certain places, I recommend like consortiumnews.com and different places like that. Sonar 21 is a must. That's Larry Johnson's website. And if you notice, you go there, he has guest writers that have really good stuff there, guest contributors. He has his own stuff, and he's really on top of the latest things that are happening. And of course, you want to subscribe. And don't forget, when you go there, you got PayPal, PayShoot, Patreon, and Buy Me a Coffee. As we always discuss here, look, the people that are doing the hard work on alternative media, let's face it, none of us are making a fortune. A lot of us aren't making anything at all. Be lucky to break even, but we do it because we really love it and we believe it. And hey, Larry's got to pay for servers and websites and all technical crap. So if you can afford it, make sure you share, donate. And if you can, share sonar21.com on all of your social media platforms. Now, interesting article. Trump's gambit to weaken Brics Backfires. Is he still trying to woo Russia in a bid to defeat China? And if we go there, there's another article that is pretty important and relative. Look at this. President Putin receives India's external affairs minister. A second high-ranking Indian official has arrived in Moscow within the past 2 weeks to engage in discussions with the Russian president. Prior to this, Prime Minister Modi's national security advisor visited Moscow. So we've got lots of things going on. I tell you right now, Trump seems to be the best thing that ever happened to Brics. He's the king of Brics. He's like building bricks, shall we say?
Yeah, man, they're going to give him an award at the next meeting. Maybe even give him the Nobel Peace Prize because he's brought India and China closer together. So
3 billion people, man, they were over here and now they're tighter than tight can be.
Yeah. So Trump's initiatives, whatever their, his stated goal to make America great again, bring industry back to America, provide better jobs for Americans. Okay, well and good. But in the process of that and imposing these tariffs, he has both angered and energized two critical countries, India and Brazil. And a year ago at the summit in Kazan, the BRICS summit, I would have come out saying that, I could see ways that an intelligence operation directed against India, directed against Brazil, could separate them from Russia, China, and South Africa. So it would have been a way to sow division. What Trump's tariff and sanctions threats have done is just enraged the population. Even those who oppose like the current governments, even those opponents of Modi in India and Lula in Brazil, they view this as outside interference. It's exactly what happened to me when we lived in Argentina, and we lived with an Argentine family because we were having a house constructed and we had to stay with them. So one morning, this couple comes out and announces they're getting a divorce. And I said, well, Ana and Beto, I said, man, I'm really sorry to hear that, but, I can understand it because, Ana, you are a very difficult person to live with. They stayed married for another 2 years just to spite me. They got so mad at me. So that taught me.
Saved their marriage.
That taught me early on the lesson of outside interference. No matter how right you think you are, no matter how much justification you think you have, once you stick your nose in the middle of something like that, all of a sudden it brings them together. And I mean, and you saw this as a cop dealing with domestic disturbances. A domestic violence call was the most dangerous damn thing you did any day.
I know a guy but my partner got stabbed in the hand.
Yeah.
He goes there, and the man was, struggling with the woman, beating her up, whatever, right? He grabs the guy and wrestles the guy off, away from her. He's fighting with the guy. She jumps on his back and stabs him in the hand with a penknife. So he's like, I'm pulling him off of you. And now you're trying to kill me. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So there's a little bit of, this is the United States sticking its nose into these internal affairs of these countries. And those countries, rather than continue fighting with each other internally, they turn outward to the United States and say, okay, you're not going to boss us around. So now what's happened is India is expanding, not just through BRICS, but expanding its bilateral diplomatic, trade, and even military ties with China. So Trump has united these countries in a greater alliance, which makes it difficult for him. The other thing that's coming down the pike, though, the perception on the Trump team is, see, we have got those tariffs, the money's rolling in, and it didn't cause inflation. Nothing's going to happen. No, you watch middle of September, 1st of October, the tariff prices are going to start hitting, and it's going to be the inflation is going to take off in this country again. And we're going to be faced, I think we're going to be faced with stagflation already across Europe. Right now, a large number of the countries, I have a debt to GDP ratio of over 100%. And people say, okay, what the heck is that? That just simply means you're spending more money than you're taking in, okay? If you get a $100 paycheck a month and you're spending $125 a month, you're going into debt. And which is, in fact, exactly what the United States is doing, where our debt to GDP ratio is 125%. So it's like spending 125 when we only have 100. Britain is 100. France is 110. Germany was like at 40, and now it's up closing in on 80. So it's already borrowing money because it doesn't have enough income to sustain it. And then these economies across Europe are stagnated. They're growing 0.5%, 0.3%, which is essentially no growth. Right. So in the midst of this, then Trump's turning around those countries and say, okay, you got to kick in 5% of your GDP to NATO because we're not funding it anymore. And and then you got to buy the weapons from us so you can sell them back to Ukraine.
Marked up 10%. That's what I love.
That's
what I love. Trump's like, we're going to sell them to you. Okay, yes, master. Yes, oh, great Lord and master, we'll do it. I mean, these people are pathetic. It's the most pathetic display of subservience that you could ever see.
Right.
And then, as if to absolutely finish off the humiliation, it's like, okay, you have prostrated yourself before the emperor, and now, kiss my boots. Okay, great. Now, I have not humiliated you enough. Let me add this. I'm going to add on 10%. Why? Because you're idiots and fools and clowns, and I can do that to humiliate fools and clowns. Okay, we'll pay the extra 10%. You're like, good God.
Yeah. I mean, it was, Trump with those Europeans reminded me of Eddie Murphy from that movie Coming to America, where back when he's the king, he's claps his hands, wipers.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, sorry.
It was the most. But I mean, you look at it and you're like, what did P.T. Barnum say? It's a crime against God and nature to allow a sucker to keep his money. That's the way Trump treats these people. Yeah. Now, I don't know how long it's going to last, but that takes us back to this. You brought up BRICS and all of that. Here's my understanding. I've been reading a lot of international stuff. Well, apparently, these when we go after Brazil and India and China, they say things like, we buy soybeans and tobacco and all these other things from the U.S. Well, you know what? We'll fix you. we'll buy it from. How about you? Apparently, Russia's building these big pig farms now because these other BRICS countries are like, well, we'd like to buy pork from somebody else. And Russia's, oh, give us a little bit. We'll build the pig farms. And they're all going to figure out how they can sell. They got room. They got people that want to work. If you got people saying, hey, you need jobs, we'd like to build pig farms, count me in. That's work for me. I can feed my family. And there's money, and China and India or whoever is saying, we'll buy them from you. The market is there. It's crazy that we're running these people out of the U.S. market.
Yeah, it is. It's actually very damaging to American farmers. And we got another crisis brewing. And listen to this. They're going to have the greatest corn crop ever harvested in the history of the United States this year. Mm-hmm. We've got there's so much corn out there, they don't know what to do with it. Well, that's bad news for the farmers because the price of corn, it's because of the great supply, the price falls. And with that falling price, all of a sudden these farmers who've taken out loans and got to pay back the loans and the interest rates are still high. So they could be in crisis, as well as some of the sales they traditionally made to China are no longer making because China said, basically, okay, we're not going to deal with the United States. We'll buy from Brazil. And so Brazilian farmers are doing great. So this, amidst all of this, if you call it the political drama of are there going to be peace talks between Russia and China or Russia and Ukraine, and there's Donald Trump going to sit down with Putin and Zelensky. There are some real economic problems, the international economic problems in the background that are likely to derail all of this. And Trump will have it actually inflicted him, self-inflicted wound with the tariffs, because already it's disrupting. Well, it wasn't just the tariffs, it was also these foreign students who are anti-Zionists who you got to stay home. The number of the drop off in foreign students coming to the United States is, like 30%, which this is going to hurt the bottom line of a lot of these colleges and universities because students paid full freight. Then on top of it, that sort of this anti-Zionist going after these anti-Semites, so-called, is led to a drop-off in tourism to the United States. Las Vegas is hurting, Disney World, Orlando hurting. The New York City's seen a drop-off. So, like I said, this is the law of unintended consequences, and in the course of it, it's going to, I think, it's going to saddle Trump with some real serious economic challenges here at home that will potentially derail his dreams of consolidating control of the House and Senate in the midterms.
Yeah, I used to teach as an adjunct, right? And there's a lot of people, it's a good side job. When I first retired from law enforcement, it's a good side job for a lot of people, you know what I mean? And if you have a specialty and you want to be an adjunct professor, especially in an area like DC and Maryland, there's colleges everywhere, right? And you go around, oh, I need somebody to teach this, and you get a class here, a class there, you can get the times. I remember I would have like 8 to 9, 9 to 10, or 8 to 10, or Tuesday and Thursday. And so you can arrange them, if you don't need to do that. Some people need to do it full time, but it's a great job. And like you said, there's a lot of foreign students there, and you adjunct, and you can make, it's a good way for people to make extra money, side jobs, part-time jobs, you name it. There's nighttime. Man, I have heard, since you say that a lot of that's drying up.
Yeah.
That a lot of that adjunct work for people is drying up because, like I know one guy, he's like, in order for me to teach this class, it was, I used to teach with him. It was over at Virginia Tech has, how they have like a little campus. There's a campus in Northern Virginia, and the course, so you could teach courses there, and they needed 6 students for that course. Just 6. They didn't have 6 students. They only had 5. They called them and said, sorry, the course is canceled because, usually we have 25 or 30 students. This is funny you mentioned that. He says, we couldn't get 6 students for that course.
Yeah.
That's big. That's costing people jobs. But at any rate, well, what's interesting is Now, I'll say this: the Russians have been trying to facilitate rapprochement between India and China for some time now.
Right.
Here's what I was told by a person who knows India well. I might have told you this before. I hope I didn't. They said, look, one of the issues that the Modi government had was they've done a lot of it for political purposes, of course, a lot of anti-China propaganda inside of Israel. Yeah, China's bad. Oh, you know how they, I mean,
Right.
inside of
Right.
India, you know how the governments play the game, right? And it's difficult for them because they've done so much to then come back and say, we're going to be friends with China. Now that they've convinced everybody that China was the devil, he said, but what these, actually she said, but what these sanctions have done has infuriated the Indian population, especially the farmers.
Yeah.
So much, especially the Indian farmers. They're the angry. The Indian farmers are calling for an informal boycott of like everything. They're like, don't buy anything American. But they're so furious, they're now encouraging the government, saying you need to go make a deal with China so we can sell our stuff and do business with China. I mean, they want to eat, you know what I mean? But that's interesting how it changes the internal dynamics in India, so that now the people are making an insistence to the government, you got to make a deal with China.
Yeah, the United States has lost the art of diplomacy. Now, you can make a claim that Trump may have trying to reignite that, restart what we used to do with his conversation meeting with Vladimir Putin last Friday. Because in December 2023, when I was in Moscow, I had a chance for a brief conversation with the deputy foreign minister, the number 2 guy in the foreign ministry, Sergei Rybkov. And Mr. Rybkov said at the time, he said, look, we don't have anybody to talk to. So he said, even during the bad old days of the Cold War, he says, the Russian, the Soviet and American side always found a way to talk and to converse, and our ambassadors would talk, and the foreign ministry would be in touch with State Department, vice versa, and even your president would talk to our premier. And so
the Reagan walk or whatever, went for a walk with the.
Well, I mean, and whether they're talking to Gorbachev, whether they were talking to Brezhnev, Yuri Andropov, but there was conversation. We don't have any, is what he said. But when Trump made his first calls to Putin this year, that opened the door. And then this meeting that took place in Alaska with all the symbolism, the outward symbolism of it, because you could see the warmth between the two guys, between Trump and Putin. It wasn't a phony, smile at each other. There seemed to be sort of a genuine connection there. And Trump was really pleased to see Putin. So that's the good news. They're talking. They're on the road to at least having normal diplomatic exchanges and conversations instead of threats and bullying.
One of the things you talk about in your article on Sonar 21 is about a paper by A. Wes Mitchell.
Yeah.
Who's a buddy of all people, Eldridge Colby. I got my issues with that guy, of course. He wants a war with everybody, wants a war with somebody. He wants a war with China. But if you could talk about that paper and the importance of it.
Yeah, Aaron Wes Mitchell was, he's got the academic credentials of, studied in Germany and, multiple languages, got a degree from, I think, Oxford College. So, on the academic side, he's great. And he was in part of the U.S. Foreign Service, rose to the level of Assistant Secretary, basically for Asian affairs under President Trump. And he got out of government. He set up his own think tank. He's a young guy now, probably around 50. Younger than me. So, if you're 50, you're a young guy.
Yeah, exactly.
But he was tasked to write this paper by the Office of, I think it's Strategic Studies, or it's a policy shop in the Pentagon that looks at trying to, cobble together defense strategy. And what Mitchell says, look, we can't be in a position where we, the United States, have to fight both Russia and China because they're combined together. They're bigger than us. They're stronger than us. So what we've got to do is figure out how to weaken them. I mean, this is the thinking. Instead of saying, why do we have to think that? Why can't we just get along with them? How about that? Let's not say, hey, you're an enemy. Let's say you're friends. Let's be friends. Oh, no, we can't have that. Good God. And so what he comes up with, and I lay out basically 5 key paragraphs from his long paper, is, and remember, this was published in August of 2021, 7 months before the start of the special military operation. And what he basically advocates is what we need to do is inflict a military defeat on Russia using Ukraine. So once Russia is defeated, it'll realize it needs to be part of our camp, be part of Team USA, so we can go then take care of China. That's what this is about. Now, Mitchell presents the relationship between Russia and China as if, Russia is the prison bitch of China, and that China is dominant, and that Russia's going to resent this, and Russia's going to push back. And so we got to play up on that feeling, manipulate that in order to take care of China. Now, it's still, underlying all this is this assumption, well, China's an enemy. Well, we got to be prepared to fight and defeat China because they're an enemy. Look at all the countries they've invaded. Since 1980, none. Okay, none. But we've been the one invading other countries. If any country in the world was going to gear up militarily to defeat the United States because of what we've done in the past, they'd be entirely justified. We got a really bad track record. But the reason I focused on this and raised it as was this part of Trump's strategy is I have spoken to several people in the last week, and these are wealthy individuals. These are well-educated individuals. Some are West Point grads. And to a person, they're all believing that Russia can never really be a full partner with China, and we've got to peel off, divide, split Russia away from China, and then get Russia into our camp. I mean, they're really, and you try to say, whoa, wait a second. What's taken place now between Russia and China, thanks in part to Joe Biden, thanks in part to Donald Trump, more to Biden than Trump, is that they now have a political, diplomatic, economic, and military relationship unprecedented. There is no historical precedent for this in the history of those two nations. And they forged very close ties to the point that, Putin is coordinating constantly with Xi, as he did prior to this summit in Alaska, called Xi up and said, hey, here's what we've talked about with Witkoff. Here's what we're going to do. This is our position. Because I think China in particular would be worried as, would Russia sell them out? And so Putin's making every effort, going sort of above and beyond the call of duty, to reassure these other countries and Brics in particular, I'm not going to sell you out. I'm not going to be a Judas to the movement.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. And I think that based on, some of the things that I've been reading in Russian press and based on what you have written here, it appears to me that it's just the opposite. Yeah. That Russia is saying, look, because, and for a while, people have been saying India's the weak link. India doesn't know what they want to do. The U.S. can slip in with India. Is Modi going to blah, blah, blah? And I think, look, Russia heard the footsteps in China, and they're all kind of looking like, oh, okay, what's going to happen with India? And I think that the Russians, who seem to, let's just say, Sergei Lavrov seems to be a pretty good diplomat. Yeah. I think they see, perfect. Thanks, Trump. We're glad you hit them with 50% tariffs. Now they're pissed. Now we can call them and say, come on in, guys. You see where you're standing with the Americans. You were thinking about, you're on the fence. They're going to try to screw you. Now let's do business. And they're going to take that window when the Indians are really pissed and really angry and facing 50% tariffs and say, this is the time to make our moves. And let's face it, from the Indians' perspective, this guy just punched you in the face. You
Yeah.
have to look at it and say, in the long run, I think the Russians, perhaps in hindsight, the Russians and Chinese were right all along. I better go over in this camp so I can strengthen myself because these people will impoverish me.
Yeah. Yeah. We've done ourselves no favors. And I think we talked about this a little bit last Thursday with even the tariffs that were imposed on Switzerland. Switzerland was like, what? Because Switzerland is a major exporter, one of its main exports to the United States are diabetes drugs. Now, I had someone point out to me that I think the Netherlands exports a larger share of what the total that goes to the United States. But the point is, the United States is using tariffs as a form of sanctions and hitting nations that normally consider themselves our friends and allies. And now they're even being forced to reconsider that. I know that the Chinese or the Japanese and the South Koreans are doing exactly that. And notice that yesterday, India very boldly announced, hey, we're still buying Russian oil and to the United States, and you can't stop us. You know, basically, hey, go ahead and try. Uh, so the era of the United States being able to dictate to other countries what they must do, and who they must obey, that's over. And we're watching the emergence of this new world order right now. And it's the United States is going to be much weaker and much less influence than we like to imagine.
Let's look at, so, we need to talk about this. Let's get to another great article, Sonar 21, and that is Trump still fails to understand Russia's fundamental reason for the special military option, but he is trying. Now,
Yeah.
And I'm for this. When I talked about the Alaska summit, I said, hey man, that was a really good look. I was happy about that. I don't want to get nuked. I got family members and a daughter and all this stuff. I don't want them. I want them to have a future. So I'm all for that. And this is great. And I had people, why are you supporting Trump? This has nothing to do with Trump. I don't support politicians or not support politicians. I have policies that I believe in. And one of them is that we should all survive and not get nuked.
Yeah, yeah.
Trump still fails to understand Russia's fundamental reason for the SMO, but he is trying. Larry, what's the?
Yeah, so
let's get to that.
we heard two themes coming out of this. As one, presenting the war in Ukraine as if it's a conflict between Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky, and that if we just get Putin and Zelensky together, they can sort this out, and we'll have peace. That's not the problem. That's not what caused this war, or that this is a dispute over land, that Russia wants this land. And the stupid argument that is constantly made by all these pundits, Jack Keane, among most prominent among them, is that, look, Russia has been fighting for 3.5 years and they've only taken 19% of Ukraine. And so they're going nowhere. They're failing. And it's like, oh, okay, time out. This is not about seizing land. Never has been. This is about expelling NATO influence from Ukraine and getting rid of this neo-Nazi government that is what currently occupies the presidential palace there in Kiev. So the demilitarization, denazification, and the demilitarization means eliminate NATO's influence inside Ukraine, because that Russia views that as an existential threat. That's what this is about. It's not about getting Zelensky and Putin together to negotiate about who gets what land. For starters, even the West continues to entertain saying, well, the Russians will settle for getting the Donbass, which is Donetsk and Luhansk republics, but they'll give up on Kherson and Zaporizhia. No, they won't. Both those latter two, Kherson and Zaporizhia, like Donetsk and Luhansk, they're all formally now part of Russia, the Russian Federal Republic. And, Putin can't give that territory up any more than Donald Trump could give Putin Alaska back. Hey, okay, here's Alaska, take it.
Or Hawaii. I would say Crimea is like Hawaii. Give up Crimea. Well, you give up Hawaii. That's where
Yeah,
you've got the whole Pacific fleet and
yeah,
everything out of Hawaii. So you're going to give that up? Oh, that's too critical for us. Yeah,
yeah,
that's Crimea. It's even more critical.
exactly.
That's like giving up Virginia, where you got the Norfolk Navy base.
Yeah, so Trump is trying. What I it was sort of funny after the summit, he was talking about, yeah, Russia's a big country. That it covers 11 time zones, or is it 9? So he's at least got a notion that it's at least 9 time zones. It's fully 11,
Right.
which if people want to understand that distance, go to Maine and then travel to Hawaii, and you've basically traveled through 6 time zones. Add 5 more onto that. Okay. That's what we're talking about. That is an incredible expanse of land. And so, the last thing Russia needs is more land. They don't need to occupy it. They're not lacking in natural resources, which is traditionally, historically, another reason countries go to war. So they don't need land. They don't need resources. They just want to be left the hell alone.
Well, and I always tell people, if you want to understand conflicts, the first thing you should do when it comes to any conflict is look at a map of the area, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you look at this map right here, what do you see? When you look, you see Belarus. This is okay. The up around Estonia and Latvia, where they absolutely despise. They're goose stepping all over the place over there. But if you look at this belly of Russia, you got Belarus, which is a huge wealth. Russians have that secured. But look at Ukraine, right under the gut. I mean, you could shiv a knife right into them. You're right here, boy. You're nowhere from Moscow. The Russians are not going to allow this. However, if they've got Belarus and they've got Ukraine under control, it's hard for the Europeans to get to them.
Yeah.
The Europeans cannot. The Europeans got to bunch all the way up here and try to get to them, or they got to go up to Finland, which, you know what? It's open space. Yeah, there's a lot, but there's only like 6 million Finns there. Yeah, that's a lot. But if you put these bases up here in this open space, if you go to war with them, they'll be vaporized in minutes. They're wide open. And what do? How are you going to attack from there? Not an easy thing. You're going to be vaporized in seconds. But from Europe, where everything is, you look at that map, they ain't never going to allow Ukraine. Look at the Black Sea, all of that. They want to control all of that stuff as a defensive line, not an offensive line. In fact, if you look at it, it doesn't even work well if they wanted to attack Europe, which is if they don't have enough lunatics, that they want to get rid of now. So when you look at it, it makes no sense for the Russians to say, we're going to go attack Europe and take what? And put that on their balance sheets? First of all, they're all broke. And Russia is not broke. Why would they want a bunch of people who are going to put them in the negative financially? They ain't paying off their bills. They ain't doing them a favor.
Yeah, in fact, their populations are aging more rapidly and in a more extreme fashion than Russia's. Russia, the replacement birth rate is you got to have like 2.1 children per family in order to replace current population. Well, the most of the so-called developed world is well below that, with the United States and Russia are but roughly the same level, about between 1.6 and 1.8. The difference, though, is Russia has instituted national policies to encourage women to have children, to reward families that have more than one child, providing vacation time, providing financial incentives, providing actually extended leave up to 3 years. I think it's 3 years in some cases. So, I mean, they're really being proactive about it. But the U.S. isn't.
You guys have been proactive against trans families, for trans families or something like that.
Yeah,
that's good. Well, you probably get some tax breaks for that.
And that's where, as you correctly note, Europe they don't need that cultural mess that Europe has become. They used to be staunch, stalwart Christian countries. Now, it looks like the the Muslims are able to do in the 21st century what they failed to do in the 14th and 15th century.
Well,
Yeah.
here's the difference. I once had a person, and I never thought about this before. They were talking about how um this was an African guy, and he was talking about how, look, they went and destabilized it. He started getting into, and I never thought about this. The whole thing in Europe started when all of these Syrians showed up. 2 million Syrians showed up when they started the dirty war in Syria.
Mm-hmm.
And so then they destabilized these countries, and these people showed up on their doorstep. And the guy said to me, he says, I got a question, Garden. He said, what? What? I said, you ever notice there ain't no black people with Russian or Chinese names? And I said, yeah. He goes, that's because the Russians and Chinese didn't go grab a bunch of black people and drag them back over there. They're all got European names. So when you
Yeah.
look at it, what you notice is this: Russia does not have a problem with people coming from all over the place there. Here's the thing about it. The Russians, now this is interesting, get along really well with the Africans. And the Africans are not all running to Russia. They're showing up in Europe, but they aren't running to Russia. And Russia has a good relationship with them. Isn't it interesting how that works?
Yeah. Well, in fact, let's see, I met when I was in Moscow. I was there. I actually was with the grandson of Nelson Mandela for a little bit. But what I noticed with the Russians in dealing with the Africans because I was at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum in June 2024, a year ago, and there were representatives, I think, from almost every country in Africa, and they sense whether they're being taken seriously or whether they're being patronized. And the Russians everyone was treated the same, with same respect, and talked to as if they were important, not just as a show, but genuine interest in their ideas. And, people pick up on that. They're not fools. They know when someone's blowing smoke up their skirt, and they know then when, hey, the folks are genuine. And that's what the Russians have perfected. In a way, they've not had their souls scarred by the legacy of racism that we've had in this country, both against the blacks and the Native Americans, and where we've made such a big deal of the pigment of one's skin, as if that's determinative about intelligence or capability, or and I never picked up that vibe in Russia. They were just like sort of that part of their brain hadn't been developed, which is a good thing.
Well, a lot of people don't realize, you start traveling to like a lot of areas in Russia, and the people are very Asian. They have that indigenous kind of the Asian kind of look, right? And you look at them, and you know what they are? They're Russians.
Yeah.
Now they'll say, okay, these are the people that live in a such and such region of Siberia, and this is the so and so group or whatever their historical name is, right? And they live in this area where it's called, I watched some village where it's like 20 below all the time, right? And I forgot what they called the name of this group. And they live the way they live, 3,000 miles from the nearest. And they've been living this way for thousands of years. Everybody's happy, but they're Russians. They're Russians.
Yeah.
And they don't have to get into their this or that. They're just Russians. And Russia, it seems to have gotten good. Why the hell would they? It doesn't even make sense that the Russians, who they're doing their own thing. They got areas where there's Muslims in Russia, and they kind of allowed to do their own things, and they're happy. And if there's a war, they're like, we're proud Russians. We're going to go fight for Mother Russia. They got all that stuff kind of straight. Why the hell would they want to turn into France and Germany? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and when you go back to look at the real roots of this animus towards Russia, I really believe it's a reaction to their rebirth as a Christian Orthodox nation. And I've seen several Western pundits just ridicule Vladimir Putin for this so-called Christian. No, he's genuine about it. And what a lot of Catholics not to knock on Catholics, but a lot of Catholics don't understand about the Orthodox Christians. Those are some hardcore people, because when they go to church, they don't sit in a pew, they don't kneel on kneeling boards. Okay, they stand
Yeah, yeah.
for an hour and a half, and old women, old men, young people. Um, so it's a different tradition, and that's part of that, I think, is what has made the Russians sort of a, if you will, a tough people.
Hmm.
You know, they'll stand there in honor of God for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and with great ceremony and great pageantry. Um, so the and with that, they believe, they translate the religious belief into actual social policies, which is one of the reasons they don't promote abortion. Uh, they encourage people to have children, not kill them. The healthcare situation is fabulous. That you can actually get healthcare, and you're not going to be jumping through a bunch of insurance company hoops. There's a whole financial industry. Uh, their pharmaceutical industry there as well. It's not financialized to the point that you got to keep coming up with new drugs that you can sell people that you're deliberately making sick because you're encouraging them to eat fast food and junk food and sugar, so that you can then have to buy all of these pharmaceuticals, your type 2 diabetes drugs. And it's sort of a nasty, vicious form of capitalism here in the West, where what the Russians are practicing is, they're fully capitalist, but it's really sort of, I'll call it, a more pure form of economic incentive, not some of the perverse incentives that we deal with here.
Yeah, I remember during COVID when the Russians were like, I think they shut down for 2 weeks. They said, we're not going to do this. And then the Europeans had, you had to have this thing on your phone in order to travel. And the Russians said, man, we ain't going to do that. That would be bad for your freedom. And I'm like, I thought you're telling me that the Russians were the bad guys. I thought you were telling me that
Right.
we had all these freedoms and they don't. And when they went on about their business and lived their lives, and some people passed away, some people didn't, and they did the best they could. But they just said, your freedom's important here. We're not going to make it conditional upon traveling. God knows that you dream of even going to Canada. Forget
Yeah.
that. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Not happening. I don't think you could even get on a train and like the tram or move around. So you ultimately, and we're not saying Russia's perfect. We're just saying that I think all this business about they're the enemy, they're evil, it's a totalitarian society, that's all propaganda. It's a country of people
Yeah.
who have a tradition, who love their country, they respect their traditions, and who they just want to be left alone. And that's why I say this. I'll get back to this. I felt very good. I don't know what's going to come of it, but I felt very good about the Alaska meeting for this reason. We've been told that President Putin is the evil demon, most evil person. He just kills everybody, blah, blah, blah. You saw him get off the plane. You saw the red carpet. You saw the handshake. You saw them ride in the big Cadillac together. You saw the pomp and circumstance and pageantry and regency of powerful leaders. And you juxtapose that over these clowns showing up in Trump's office looking like just absolutely lily-livered wimps. I think it was a great contrast to see.
Well, I called them the European pimps.
Yeah.
with their run prostitute Zelensky, because they've all used Zelensky to make money up to this point. Now Zelensky's going to be costing them some money. That's number one. I did. Out of curiosity, I went back, and one of the benefits of all this AI, different platforms, is you can ask a question and get an answer. So the question I asked was, what was the press coverage of Vladimir Putin and Russia in 1999? And it gives me the answer, and references, and the evidence. It was positive. Same for 2000. Same for 2001. Same for 2002. Doing puff pieces about, hey, Vladimir Putin, great guy. I think Barbara Walters interviewed him in like 2001. And when 9/11 happened to us, Putin was the first one to step up and say, hey, anything you need from us, We'll help you. You know, get back into Afghanistan. You can come through our territory. You know, as cooperative as can be. The press turned. The narrative shifted. Putin became evil in 2003. Do you know why?
Let's see. There was a war that we were pushing on in
Amen,
2003,
brother.
and they
You nailed it.
didn't support it.
Yeah, you just went yard, you know. Bases loaded, knocked it out of the park. That's exactly it. He refused to support the United States war in Iraq. Tried to veto it at the UN, you know, pushed back against it. And that's when all of a sudden we went, oh, yeah? Okay, we'll show you. And we began this flood of propaganda. The Brits, you know, there have been a couple of operations run in the UK. They're always presented as Russia trying to assassinate people. And the evidence on all of those shows that this was more of a British intelligence operation designed to try to accuse Russia, paint Russia as the villain, when actually Russia was just, you know, ended up being a stooge being used to create a narrative. And so out of this, we've had this, as you said, the number of times you heard people say, "Oh, Putin's evil." Give me the exact list of what he's done. So let's go with they'll say what we can identify 12 people that have died because of Putin's orders, except we have no evidence he actually gave orders. But let's go with that. 12 people, huh? How many are credited to Bill and Hillary Clinton? Last number I saw was well over 40, okay? And yet, you know, we allow them to walk the streets, and we don't not saying they got to be locked up. I mean, some have said lock them up.
Those are all suicides, by the way.
Yeah. You know, even the guy that shot himself in the back of the head 3 times.
Yeah,
you know.
there was the other guy in the guy that let people in that let Epstein in. That guy hung himself and shot himself with a shotgun in the chest at the same time.
Yeah, he felt so much remorse.
Yeah.
So what has been fed to the American people is a bag of lies about Vladimir Putin and being my favorite is he was KGB. Yeah, and I know a lot of CIA people who, you know, some clean toilets.
How about George H.W. Bush? He was former CIA chief. I mean, what does that mean? It doesn't mean a thing.
That just because you've joined the CIA or KGB doesn't mean that you passed a test where you have achieved a level of violence, a level of malevolence, a level of cunningness, that you are the most manipulative, smartest person in the world. Is one of my buddies from the agency who is complained quite a bit about the quality of some of the people there. He said, you know, when you join the CIA, you got to take all this battery of tests and you got to do all these interviews. He said, I think we'd come up with better people if we just had a bus drive around Northern Virginia and Maryland and the District of Columbia and just stop randomly and grab people off the street. Okay. You know, not at gunpoint, but just grab, okay, you've been selected, you get on the bus, you know, because he said we'd come up with a much greater, you know, better talent, better quality people than what we're getting. Because there was a lot of nepotism.
Oh, yes.
With CIA, you know, you watched this, you know, one of the guys that signed the letter claiming the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian, had all the appearance of Russian disinformation. Steve Hall. Steve was he was a young kid. You know, when I joined the agency, I was 30 and we were in a career trainee program. And here's Steve, he's 21, 9 years younger. And well, his dad had been a top senior CIA official. And folks I know that worked with him said he was terrible. He was incompetent. So, but, you know, it goes on. And he's not the only one. There were multiple like that. So, you know, this is the kind of hereditary stuff that we used to say we hated Europe for, where it would pass on legacies because of the gene pool. You know, who won the lucky sperm race.
Let me ask you this. and we see this, and Marjorie Taylor Greene talks about it a lot. The MAGA people, and a lot of people that aren't MAGA people. I know people that voted Democrats their whole life. They voted for Trump. I know people.
Yeah.
Didn't even like him that voted for him because they were so unhappy with the Democrats. They were like, let's give this guy a try. Let's try anything, right? But one of the big things was we're sick of these foreign entanglements. And Marjorie Taylor Greene always tweets about it. People don't want a new. They're sending destroyers to Venezuela. I've been to Venezuela. I traveled around Venezuela. That ain't a place you want to get into a war. Everybody's armed and they'll all shoot at you. They gave away tens of millions of AK-47s and ammo, specifically saying, if the Americans come and invade us, everybody's deputized, let them have it. I'm like, you don't want to go there.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's with it? I fear that Trump thinks he's going to march into Venezuela and take all the oil. That is going to be a bad move. And Mac is going to go apeshit if he does that, to be frank. They're going to go furious when the body bags start coming home, and they will.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. Look, whatever, part of what Venezuela has become, first with Chavez, then with Maduro, was a direct reaction to what the CIA had been doing in that country for 50 years.
Well, and over South America.
Yeah, but specifically when I was with the agency between 85 and 89, I know at least even the president of Venezuela at the time, I think it was Echeverria, had been a CIA asset. I mean, he'd been on the CIA payroll. So, that we had bought, paid, and controlled that country, and then all of a sudden, people said, "No, we want to have our own control." Now, hey, if they made some what I would consider bad decisions, yeah, none of my damn business. You know what? If you're gonna, it's only if you come live with me and want me to pay your bill, then okay, I'm gonna have a say in what you do. But otherwise, if you're going to be independent and let us not interfere. So this is, I don't know what Trump and the team think they're doing. I'm hoping that they're just, doing another show of force, putting flexing muscle and walking up and down the beach saying that we're tough or bad. But the last thing Trump wants to do is start a war with Venezuela, because I guarantee you, that's going to ignite anti-U.S. furor throughout the region, because they're sick and tired of U.S. bullying, particularly we'll see it in Colombia, we'll see it in Panama.
And you have a lot, like in Colombia, you have a lot of places where there are kind of like militias for one reason or another, and there are people that are armed militias, whether they're fighting over drugs, whether they want control of the country. You could create a dynamic where a bunch of these militias say, hey, there's American bases here or there. What a perfect time to start attacking them. That's something, to me, that's like, man, you start a war in Venezuela. That may be a Pandora's box in South America that you just opened that you can't get out of.
Yeah. And, you've traveled there, and it's I've been
the terrain.
I've been to Caracas and Barquisimeto and some other spots down south, and it's a land made for guerrilla warfare.
Oh, very mountainous, small towns and pockets of the mountains all over the place. You get to fighting out there, you don't have a chance. They all know the areas. Yeah. They lived in that area. They know the areas. You get in those areas, man, I just can't imagine a hornet's nest that could be any worse than.
Yeah, I mean, we'd be setting ourselves up for new human rights abuses, and because we'd be killing a lot of civilians. And we justify it because, they're supporting the enemy, please.
And I just think that it would be one of those things, like when you got in Iraq and you're stuck in there for years and there's an insurgency and body bags are coming home and you already have economic issues here. Let me just say this. We need to be addressing the economic issues here. I think the debts, now that's the other thing. Trump comes in. This isn't a Trump loving section or a Trump bashing section, but he says, hey, we got a debt problem. And a lot of people are like, yeah. And everybody says, yeah, it's up to 37 trillion now.
Yeah.
Well, it costs even that. Let's say you start another war. It's going to cost another $1 trillion to fight a war there that
Yeah.
we don't have.
Yeah. No, and that's the danger of it, to really get us bogged down in this conflict. And he's always been doing it under the pretext of taking on the drug cartels. I tell you, the easiest way to take on the drug cartels: punish the U.S. banks and U.S. companies that are facilitating the drug trade by taking drug money for their products. And it's across the board. Nike, Under Armour, any manufacturer of any electronics, Philip Morris, R.J. Reynolds, any liquor producer, California wine producers. They, because the money, the cartels have all this money, and the only way they can sort of repatriate that money is turn it into products that they can then import to Mexico, to Colombia, and then sell there and get the money back in that country where it's not subject to the United States seizing it. And that's been going on. It's called trade-based money laundering. That has been extremely active over the last 30 years. And I've worked on that directly. And when you try to go after these companies, and I think I told you the story about John Deere. They were taking Colombian drug money, and when we identified that to their security officer, had contacted us, my partner and I, and when we explained to him what was going on, he then went and briefed the CEO of John Deere. The CEO of John Deere said, "Not my problem. We're going to keep doing that." So you don't have to send soldiers. Get the money.
Yep.
Get the money. We don't have to kill anybody. Get the money.
But you know what's going to happen? The Congress member that works up in Pennsylvania or wherever John Deere is, when the CEO calls him, Illinois. Oh, when he calls and says, "Look, man," he says, "we sold, $150 million in equipment to those people last year. If they cut that off, we're going to have to lay off some of your voters and constituents." They're going to then call, "Hey, not so fast." You know what I mean? See, that's when it comes down to going after the money. Then you get members of Congress and CAO calls, says, "Hey, we did donate 150,000 and bundle another 300,000. I'd hate to see that stuff." That's the thing about it. Money talks. What was that drug dealer in that one movie? He said, "Money talks and bullshit runs a marathon."
Yeah. Well, and look, this gets back to the whole issue of illegal immigration, because a lot of that was allowed because those illegal migrants, particularly the children, the teenagers who are under the age of 18, they wind up in Iowa, in Illinois, in Indiana, working in turkey farms, pig farms, chicken farms. They work for sub-minimum wage. They live in squalid conditions. But boy, it allows those who produce the eggs and meat and chickens, poultry, to make money because they've lowered their labor costs. And they've been one of the strongest lobbies against the human trafficking efforts.
And let me add this. Trump talks about immigration. You start a damn war in South America.
Yeah.
Do you know what our border is going to look like? I mean, and there'll be men, women, and children, refugees fleeing the war. If anytime there's a war, everybody knows if there's a war, there's going to be people fleeing the war. And you know what? Here's the truth of it. Under international law, if you're fleeing a war zone, you actually do have refugee status. You think they got problems with courts and not enough courts for the refugees? You start a damn war and 1 million people show up on the border saying we're refugees. How do you deal with 1 million people? There's camps, there's starving people, there's disease. They're now applying into the system for refugee status. You don't have enough judges. And of course, some of them are filtering on in, running the hell on off to do whatever. You want to talk about an immigration disaster. You start a war in South America and start bombing the hell out of poor people. Man, you have not seen the kind of disastrous border problem that will suddenly show up on our doorstep.
Right. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And that's what, it's like with Trump. There are some things I've seen him do that I really like. I'm glad he did it. But some of this other stuff is like, he's either not thinking or he's not staying in control of the people that he are supposed to work for him, and instead appear to be working against him and creating problems. The best thing he could do right now with respect to Ukraine is cut off all aid, end all military and intelligence operations, and tell the Russians, we're going to get along, okay? And tell the Ukrainians, this is over. But, if he still continues to hang in there and, say, there could be a military, off ramp to this, there isn't. This thing is, the die is cast here. Whether Russia wins it in the next 3 months or next year, I don't think the war would go beyond next year at all. It's going to shift into a different category. But we'll see that what's taking place right now is Ukraine can't stop it. Just yesterday or 2 days ago, they did another exchange of bodies, and it's the same thing we've been seeing all along. There were 19 dead Russians turned over to the Russians by the Ukrainians, and there were 1,000 dead Ukrainians turned over by the Russians. That's a 20-1. Every one Russian dies, 20 Ukrainians are dying. And we got the news yesterday, courtesy of a hack that had allegedly hacked into Ukrainian Department of Defense documents with names, dates, everything that looked legit. 1.7 million Ukrainians are dead or missing. That is a phenomenal number. And particularly when you go back and look at that, Russian killed in action and missing is probably a tenth of that. So maybe 160,000, vice 1.7 million. It is, it's unsustainable for Ukraine in the situation. So.
Yeah, and the Russians are in, that's the thing, the Trump team are like, okay, we're doing this and that. Look, Russians are not in a hurry. They don't need a deal. You do. The guy that's winning doesn't need a deal. He's making his own deal. You need a deal. And the Russians are like, we're fine. We'll just keep negotiating, talking, whatever. I'll add one thing. We're just about out of time, but I'll add one thing. One big thing that I'd do if I were Trump, I'd drop the sanctions. I'll tell you why. If you remember, the key to this thing was we're going to start a war, number one, but that wasn't the big plan. The big plan is we're going to put so many sanctions on Russia, the economy will collapse,
right.
The ruble will turn to rubble, the people will turn on Putin, cast him out of office, and we'll put some compliant Boris Yeltsin type in, right? This thing was built on the idea that the sanctions would be the key to it. Get rid of the sanctions, and there's nothing left, right? If I'm Trump, I say I'm getting rid of sanctions. Bye. I've read a lot of stuff. There's a lot of American companies right now saying, man, we can make money in Russia. We will get on the phone and say, hey, we want to come back and sell our wares in Russia, buy stuff from you. You do that. When the American companies do that, all the European companies are going to raise hell. They're going to say to their leaders, whoa, you got to let us back in. The Americans are going to steal all of the market, and there's going to be nothing left from us. The pressure will go on them. If I'm the Americans, I yank the sanctions out from under everything. To me, at that point, everything in the EU falls apart because of the corporations at that point. And how can the EU hold on to the sanctions if the Americans let them go? I don't think they can.
Yeah, and EU now is in a position. Historically, I don't think they've ever been in the same, except since the Depression, the 1930s. The only major country in Europe that has marginal economic growth is Portugal, 1.5%. Everybody else is 0.5% or lower, and so they've got that financial crisis brewing. They are not. Their export industries are shutting down. Unemployment is rising, and inflation's going up. So, it's not looking good at all. And then, in the course of this, they're trying, as you pointed out, they're going to try to coerce Russia. And yet, what Russia realized out of this entire experience is they'd before been in a codependent relationship with the West, where, sort of like a woman who's in an abusive relationship with a guy, a wife beater, and for some reason, even though he keeps beating her, she doesn't leave him. She just, can't get away. But then finally, when comes the breakup, and she gets away, and after a year or two, she goes, you know what? I don't need that anymore. Yeah, I don't need that. And even if he wants to get back together, it's going to be on completely different terms. And whatever U.S. companies want to get back into Russia, they're going to have to jump through some hoops now, because there were a few companies that stayed. Burger King stayed. McDonald's fled. I think Burger King is a better burger anyway than McDonald's, but that's neither here nor there. But
they're plain broiled.
yeah. So that's what the situation is. That Russia gets to be to choose who comes back. But you're right. There is the growing pressure on this side. Hey, let's, we're leaving money on the table over there. Let's get back to it.
Yeah, I hope he does that. I don't know that he will. Trump's at war. The West is at war with itself. There's an internal factional war. At any rate, thanks a lot, Larry. Let me remind everybody the importance of following, if I can get this darn thing up, of following Larry's website, sonar21.com. Lots of great articles there, lots of good stuff. Make sure that you subscribe. And of course, you can do PayPal, PayShoot, Patreon, or buy me a coffee to add your part to keep Larry's good work going. Larry, thanks a lot. Certainly appreciate it, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Hey, Brother Garland, you are, and I appreciate all the good shout outs, man. I need to give you, hire you as a marketer, because you're superb. Thanks, man.
Well, it's important. You know what? And I'll say this before we go. To me, because I do this, I know, like, you got to pay for that website. If somebody donates or don't donate, you got to pay for that. Things that you need done, the traveling, you got to pay for that. If somebody happens to donate, it helps. If they don't, you still got to pay for that. And a lot of people out here, they don't realize it, but they watch this stuff all the time and they never give a dime and they can afford it. I'm not saying they have to. Some people don't. But if they have a few dollars and they can contribute, if, a lot of people give a little bit, and a few people give what they can, it helps this community we have. The people that have left Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, and all that crap and said, let's watch Larry Johnson and Scott and Ray McGovern and Dima and Judge Knapp and all that stuff. I think it makes a difference and it helps keep the community strong. So thanks a lot, man. We really appreciate the hard work that you do, Larry.
All right, brother. See you next week.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Share this on all your social